poker and stuck it in his eyes or not. I don't know what they did, but they were Philistines, and they were wicked, ungodly people. And however they did it, it really must have been something to gouge out his eyes. And then they took him back to Gaza, the capital city, and took him down in the prison and made him grind with the animals and the slaves. That's what they did to him. And all of that time, I wonder what must have been going through Samson's mind. And then the lords of the Philistines, you know the rest of that story. How they had the big party and they're making sport, and Samson said, would you put me between the pillars? Could you just put me there so I can rest my arms against them? Called out to God one last time, let me die, and he did. Now, Ryan, I don't really know if that was suicide or not, because Samson is in Faith's Hall of Fame, y'all. I would consider that a casualty of war, but it really doesn't matter how we consider it. The man still died by his actions and by his behavior. And maybe he really didn't start seeing until his sight was taken away from him. You know when I've seen God the most? Is when I've been flat on my back. Because everything's looking up there. We don't even have time to deal with all of this. I said, what happened to Samson? Mutilation, gouged out his eyes, deportation, he was taken back to Gaza, incarceration, they put him in bronze shackles, and humiliation. A grinder in the prison with the slaves and the animals. And as I thought about that, I thought about the smell myself. When you can't see, people can do all kinds of evil, wicked things to you, can't they? Because you don't know where they're coming from. They could have been, sticking him with sharp sticks. They could have been doing a whole host of things to him. But he wasn't able to defend himself. But his hair started growing back. And in his demise, he had to ask God one last time, would you please let me, be avenged because of my eyes? And I've often thought about that. Why didn't he say, Father, I'm so sorry for the way that I've acted. I'm so sorry for the way that I've treated you, for the way that I've disrespected my parents. But even to the very end, he's still concerned about his eyes. I don't know. Maybe people say, well, Brother Davis, I think you're making too much out of that. Okay. But he still died. Blinding, binding, and grinding. This is the inevitable outcome if we fail to deal with the flaws in our lives. Let me ask you to write down some of these action steps, and then I want to talk a little bit about suicide, and we'll break for lunch. Because without these action steps, I think that I would have been doing myself and you a disservice. And I'm talking about when I look at Samson and when I look at my own life, how can I deal with the flaws that are resident with me? I'm not talking about anybody else. I'm just talking about the ones in my own life. First of all, I need to acknowledge and confess my flaws. I need to own them. James chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. You've heard that passage of Scripture. You know it by heart. When we do confess our faults one to another and pray one for another, we will be healed. But for me, I need to acknowledge and I need to confess my flaws. Number two, I need to admit that I need help. And this is where most men fall off the wagon. When you know the truth about who and what you are, you will be transparent. Y'all remember Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14? What did the publican say? As he beat on his breast, he wouldn't even look up to God. He said, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. He knew the truth about himself. I need to admit that I need help. In the third place, and I really like this one, I need to avoid temptation. And see, I think that's where Samson made his greatest error. He probably thought that he had it all together. He probably thought, well, I can go near the vineyard, but it's really no big deal, and I'm strong. No. He wasn't strong enough. Remember Daniel in Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 13? Daniel made up in his own mind that he was not going to compromise or desecrate his body. That's what we have to do. We have to make it up in our own mind. We have to avoid temptation. That's number 3. Number 4, we should ask for help. We need to ask God in prayer for wisdom and direction. I've told you now for the 7th time, we need to ask and seek counsel from spiritual people. I'm not talking about people that will put your business in the street. I'm talking about people who are serious about you and serious about their soul and serious about going to heaven. Those are the people that we need to be asking help from. And then my number 5 is to assimilate God's truth into the life. Would you please turn to Psalm 119, verse 11? I know that there are other passages of Scripture that I can give you, but if I could just give you the action steps, then you can go back and you can fill in all of the passages of Scripture that would resonate with you and that will help you stay on track. To reiterate, number 1, I acknowledge and confess my flaws. Number 2, admit that I need help. Number 3, avoid temptation. Number 4, ask for help. Number 5, assimilate God's truth into my life. Psalm 119, verse 11 says what?
Thy word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against thee.
See, that's why having your own Bible is very, very important. That's why having your own personal quiet time is very important. It's not, somebody else's quiet time. It's not what somebody else sees in the Scripture. It's what you are willing to, put forth the sweat and the effort and ask God to help you understand so that you can fall deeper in love with Him. Make the assimilation yourself. Yep, I think I just stopped right there. I had 2 others, but I scratched them off. Let's see. Then the last thing I want to mention before I turn the page is that we'll either end up with a worldly view or a godly view. In Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14, the psalmist said, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That's the godly view. The worldly view is, I could be the doormat, and I guess I can go out and do whatever I want to do. People build their whole lives around that notion. But when you believe and know in your heart of hearts that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, you'll conduct yourself in a different fashion. What's your reaction to what we've talked about? And I know that this, you probably were not anticipating a character study. You probably weren't anticipating me to attack and approach this subject in this vein. But I do want to give you an opportunity to give me your reaction to what you've heard.
I'll answer, and first of all, it's been very enlightening because, as you said, we know the high points of Samson and Delilah and their strength and their hair and all that, but it gives a lot more in-depth look at his life, how he lived it, and, you know, how he impacted us.
Good, thank you, sir. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Brother, Lynn, what I like is you took an Old Testament character. A lot of times we hear that the Bible and the stuff we talk about is not relevant to today. That's just today. What he did and the things you presented is anything we could have took. It's as relevant today as it was when it was written.
Yes, sir. Indeed. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
It reminded me of the need to be mindful of our decision-making process, because of the fact the decisions that we make in life may not have an adverse effect on us at that very moment. But in the case of Samson, simple decisions wreak major havoc in his life later on.
Yes, sir. That is so very true. Wow. Excellent observation. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just looking at one, I'm looking at this more from how the parents raised Samson, because we thought that he thought everything was all about him. And I'm just wondering how much of an influence the parents were raising him, saying, oh, the angels told us about you, it's all about you, everything was all about him. And I'm wondering how much he internalized that, and that made him become how he was, because I think they may have taken it too far, thinking he was so special, he was such a special person, that they made everything all about him, and that's why he talked to them that way, because they allowed him to do that. So I think as parents, we need to look at how we're teaching our children that the world does not revolve around you. There are consequences for what you do. So I think that's something parents need to look at this.
Yes. I sure wish that I could have been a fly on the wall just to have heard that whole exchange and to see what he went through. But then the other night I had to ask God to forgive me because, you know, when I think about my own life and the things that I've heard my mom and my sister and everybody else say to me as I've been growing, as I've gotten older, have I been listening? Have I been paying attention? I mean, it was just the right thing for me. It's been a spiritual, therapeutic cleansing for me. So I thought, well, if it's been that good for me, maybe the young people, you know, I didn't want to shotgun a lot of verses at them where they have to write down incessantly and they can't concentrate. But now they can go back and focus in on him and just kind of read through and see what they can learn on their own. Anybody else? Okay, so I want to transition now to talk a little bit about suicide. And the first thing that I want to do is tell Riley that if you don't have a copy of this text, you can get it on Amazon.com for less than $2. It's called Understanding Today's Youth Culture, written by Walt Muller. It is the quintessential Bible for helping young adults deal with challenging issues. Understanding Today's Youth Culture. It's the best that's out there. I bought this in 1994, and I will still put this treatise up against anything that's out on the market. And there's one section in here, chapter 11, Guarding Your Teen's Emotions. Those 32 pages are worth the whole book. They step you through a comprehensive way of dealing with suicide. It's worth the investment. And my wife had to rein me in because she knew I was about to copy the 32 pages in here and give every one of y'all a copy. She said, "You're not killing that Demetrius. You can't, don't do that." I mean, she just had to rein me in. But I'm telling you, those of you who purchased this book, you will text me and say, "You know what, Brother Davis? You are allowed, and I will excuse you because this book was definitely worth it. You need to have this one in your library." And in my own private practice, I'm very, very particular about what I spend my money on. But the Popular Encyclopedia of Christian Counseling, since I'm a part of the American Association for Christian Counselors, I always look for good material to help me deal with some of the issues that are prevalent today. And they also have just an excellent section on suicide. You can do the reading and you can do the research. It's all out there. I am going to read some excerpts from my Christian Counseling Today magazine, which, and Riley, if you want a copy of this article, I'll be more than happy to copy it and send it to you as well. But Eric Scalise does, and he just did a superb job on this article that's called Suicide, a Tragically Permanent Decision to a Temporary Problem. It is, it's one of the best articles that I've ever read, because the question that everybody asks is, why did the person do it? And unless the person's standing in front of you, we don't know why they do it. Now, there are some instances of individuals who have survived the jump off of the Golden Gate Bridge out in San Francisco. Any of y'all ever been out there? Any of y'all ever been across that bridge? It is a magnificent structure. And so a lot of people use that as a statement that I'm going to, throw myself off the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, the one incident that I read about, this man that jumped off the bridge and lived, the question they asked him, so why did you do that? And you know what he said? What do you think he said? Ma'am? Mm-mm. 3 words.
I don't know.
That's exactly right. He said, I don't know why I did it. So that let me know that whatever emotional state that person was in, he wasn't in this world. And he said as soon as he jumped off, he said, I should not have done this. Well, it's a little bit too late. I mean, his body was all broken up. He was mangled. And they asked him, so why did you do it? I don't know. And it crushes not only that person's immediate family, it crushes the whole community. People don't even know how to act at the funeral. Preachers don't even know what to say at the funeral. They're just, what do you say? For those of you who are taking notes, and I know that this was important to me because I didn't know this. I didn't know that there were 7 instances of suicide mentioned in Scripture. Now, the word suicide is not found in the Bible. So when a person takes their life, it could be construed as suicide. Even though with some of these that I've been studying, and I've now come to a different view with regard to Samson. I just have. And somebody says, well, he still killed himself. Well, okay, he still killed himself. The first one is Saul and his armor bearer in 1 Chronicles chapter 10 and verse 4. And you got the parallel passage in 1 Samuel chapter 31 and verse 5. And even there, on Mount Gilboa, Saul asked his armor bearer to run him through with the sword, and he wouldn't do it. So he fell on his own sword. Now that's taking your own life. And he did it, and so did the armor bearer. And then you've got Samson in Judges chapter 16, verse 30. Then you've got Abimelech in Judges chapter 9, verses 50 through 55, which is that's a fascinating story to me. And for those of you who will go back and read it, you're going to find that Abimelech was approaching the wall portion of the city. I guess they were getting ready to set up the siege works. And who remembers what happened next? What did the woman do that was on the wall?
Put your millstone out the window.
Yeah, she threw an upper millstone. A certain woman. We don't even know who the woman was. But she threw a millstone, and it hit the guy and crushed his skull. And you know what he said? you know, somebody needs to kill me so they won't say a woman killed me. And see, well, I'd still say the woman killed me. Are you kidding me? She threw an upper millstone off the wall and hit the guy in the head and just almost wiped him completely out. And he's more concerned that people would say, well, you know, y'all just go ahead and run me through with the sword so that they won't say that the woman killed him. See, some people are prideful right to the very end. Well, that was Abimelech. And then you have Ahithophel in 2 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 23. Boy, that's a very interesting story. I guess he ended up being on the wrong side of history. Gave some counsel, and the counsel didn't come through. So he went home, set his little house in order, hung himself. Then you've got Zimri, who reigned all of 7 days. And boy, he was pretty ruthless as well. 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 15 through 20. Boy, the way he went out, he truly went out in a blaze of glory. Went inside the citadel and set the place on fire, and the whole place just burned him up. And then the one character in the New Testament that's really not even worth mentioning, who also committed suicide, and that was Judas. Matthew chapter 27 and verse number 5. So those are the instances that you need to start reading, and you know, the next time someone asks you about the subject of suicide, I think it would be nice to say, well, let's see what the scriptures have to say. Then you can start there. Let's look at these instances that emerge from the scripture. When you start synthesizing all of the information that's out there, you have to ask the question, well, why do people commit suicide? Some of them commit suicide because of misguided and misaligned anger or arrogance. And so they conclude by saying, I'll show you, or I'll get back at you. And they end up taking their own lives. That's why I say it's misguided or misaligned. You know, this notion of anger, you know, it just keeps popping up. And if it's not checked, if it's not controlled, it can really do a person in. Number two, it could also be misguided benevolence. And you see this sometimes with some of our older members of the population. You know, here's a guy sitting with his wife, and she's been suffering with leukemia for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And she says, well, honey, why don't you just go ahead and kill me? And you know what he does? He kills her. Now, the other thing that I find disturbing in this country is that physician-assisted suicide is acceptable in 4 states now. So when you get old, you already know the mindset of Washington, D.C. They don't even care about you. And somebody says, well, you know, they do care about me. Well, in those 4 states, you get old and you'll find out. We have pushed God to the brink. Y'all hear me? We have pushed him to the brink. And I believe God is tired of it. And this whole homosexual thing is just, all we have to do is just look at the Scandinavian countries and read the research, and we would have run from that. But no, not Americans, because you can't tell an American what to do, and nobody's going to judge me. Okay? And then the third one that I found is called escape. This is when the burdens are too heavy and just too overwhelming. And so instead of confiding in someone and telling them about what's going on, they think that the best way out is just, you know, I'll just do myself in. Then, you know, nobody will have to worry about me anymore. So it's the heightened form of selfishness is what it is. It's a weird kind of paradox. You show this ultimate power on the one hand, and then you've got this ultimate tragedy on the other. I do know that it's a sin against God, because God values life, and so does Jesus. But this sin is against God, it's against oneself, and it's also against society, and especially the extended family members. I had an article that, I think I'll just read some of this to you, and then we'll conclude. And I hate to end on this note, but by the same token, I'm grateful that these men wanted this subject broached. Because our teens are dying by the truckloads, do you hear me? And the young ladies are trying to kill themselves at 4 times the rate than the guys do. This is an article from a young lady whose grandfather committed suicide. She said, as a suicide survivor, there are things I need you to know. James chapter 1 and verse 22 admonishes us to be doers of the word and not hearers only. While 2 Thessalonians 3:13 tells us not to be weary in doing good. Yes, it is terrifying to approach others grieving in such a situation. But I promise that the grieving will appreciate any small effort on your part. We are hungry for acceptance and comfort, and your friendship can avail much in helping us recover and find our way in the long, dark days that follow. We need your hugs, your encouragement, and your prayers. We need home visits and Bible lessons to encourage the growth of our faith. 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4 states, the God of all comfort who comforts us in all of our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted of God. I need you to know that years later, I sometimes still have bad days, and I think I'm doing the best that I can, given the circumstances. I need you to know that the entire sum of a man's life cannot be judged in one act while he was very ill. My son runs to me in the bright morning along with the joy of being carefree. I know hard conversations are coming, but I rejoice in the moment of a beautiful, happy day and feel blessed. She said when her father committed suicide, even the people in the church started shunning her. The National Institute of Mental Health Statistics indicate that more than 32,000 deaths occur every year due to suicide, making it the 11th leading cause of death nationwide. This translates into a suicide every 16 minutes. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention estimates that a serious attempt is made by someone every 30 seconds, or over 1 million each year. Even more disturbing is the fact that suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for children ages 10 to 14. Adolescents ages 15 to 19, and young adults ages 20 to 24. Caucasians have the highest incidence, 12.9 per 100,000, followed closely by Native Americans. But over the past 2 decades, the suicide rate has more than doubled for African Americans, 5.3 per 100,000. Furthermore, reports show that while there are 4 male suicides for every female suicide, and that males tend to use more violent means, women make fatal attempts at twice the rate of men. Comorbidity also plays a considerable role, and the research shows that 90% of all people who die by suicide have a diagnosable psychiatric disorder at the time of their death. Something snaps in their head. Something goes wrong somewhere. And they start crying out, and they start trying to ask for help, and they may not put it in the right words, but they say things like, well, you know, I guess I'm about ready to step off this road of life. And unless you kind kind of dealt with these kinds of situations, they can be very, very memorable. We've had young men that we lost in the Air Force who were playing one of these video games. I'm not even going to mention the name of the video game. I think it has now been banned in all countries. But when you go to a dorm room and you see a young man who has taken his